Jackson, there's probably going to be a counterpoint. And you're going to put those within the same section. So here you're getting kind of what looks like information for a counterpoint. All right, so what quote in document C might you use to help prove your point? That maybe it wasn't a good idea to destroy the Bank of the United States.
When it says it sows in an unacceptable manner that seeks jealousy and ill against that government of which the author is official head, it raises the cry that liberty is in danger if the very number of its claims filed for heretofore unknown and then the next one.
Okay. So in reference to Jackson veto message, Webster is saying it urges all topics of states' rights and encroachment against that which a great majority of the states have affirmed to be rightful, which all of them have acquiesced. It sows in an uninspiring manner the seeds of jealousy and ill will against that government of which its author is the official head. It raises the cry that liberty is in danger. So basically, Webster's, what is he saying about when Jackson talks about vetoing this, and he talks about doing it on constitutional grounds, and he says it's unconstitutional, what is Webster's response to that?
He's lying. He only wants to like turn the poor against the rich.
Okay, he's trying to basically create, conflict between the different classes. But the other thing is Webster's kind of pointing out, like, the states ratified this, the states approved it. It's not like this was just done, without consulting anyone else. Jefferson and Hamilton agreed to create a bank, therefore he doesn't really understand why Jackson is so against it. He talks about liberty being in danger, when it puts forth claims to powers heretofore unknown and unheard of. I mean, he's basically saying Jackson's overstepping his boundaries, and that in itself is kind of, not acting as a guardian of either democracy or as a guardian of the Constitution. He's basically saying Jackson is not thinking rationally about the economy. He's saying that Jackson is doing this because Jackson doesn't like Henry Clay and doesn't like Nicholas Biddle, the guys who tried to make the bank an issue for Jackson in the election of 1832 by pushing the charter up. Document D is going to go in the economic section. It's going to be used. Document C is going to be used to refute the claims that Jackson is doing this to look out for the common man, to look out for the economic interest, to try to promote people getting ahead. Because Webster's basically saying he's giving reasons why Jackson isn't doing that. And then, when you refute that, you also can talk about the outside information that I'm going to give you about what happens to the economy. Document D. Harriet, a British author, reporting on her 1834 visit to the United States in Society in America. So go ahead and read through that and try to pick out a quote and see what main point you might put that in. All right, document D. Remember document C. Document C goes with economic. Document D, what do you think that goes with?
Social.
Okay, you might put it in with, you could have social as a main point, but you might put it in with like that political democracy, What's a quote that stands out about how America is changing? Okay, I had seen every man in the town as an independent citizen, every man in the country of England. That point's going to go good with political democracy, because then you can connect it to like the voting. And that's one of the things you need to use in your essay. You need to connect it to the idea that voting is changing. States are changing the laws about suffrage. More people are being allowed to vote because they're changing property qualifications. Because everybody owns property, now they're just saying, well, if you pay your taxes, you can vote. Or in some cases, states have, like Kentucky, and I think Michigan, and New York, they have universal suffrage for white males. So more people are being able to vote. So that's one of the ideas during the time period. you know, you use that quote to support that idea. I mean, you might talk about the absence of poverty, of gross ignorance. The ignorance quote is good because it goes with the idea of newspapers and education. Because more people are being educated, they're reading the newspapers and they're becoming informed voters. I mean, they're not to the level that, you know, in modern times we see, but they're a little bit more aware of the issues. And I talk a little bit about poverty, but that quote, I had seen every man in the town an independent citizen and every man in the country a landowner. That's a really good one. Document F, go ahead and look over it, figure out what outside information it might go. Well, actually, the outside information, we haven't talked about this yet. When it talks about acts and resolutions of South Carolina, one of the things that happens during Jackson's presidency is because of the high tariffs after the War of 1812 to protect American products, the South is going to become disgruntled. And John C. Calhoun, the former vice president, who after the Peggy Eaton affair went back to South Carolina, he's going to write a resolution. And he writes about nullification, about rendering federal laws null and void. And the argument is that South Carolina shouldn't have to pay the tariffs, that they should be allowed to buy products at whatever price they want, and the laws of the United States should not apply to them. That they should be able to just say, you know what, we don't like this, and we're going to get rid of it. And so Jackson will take that as a challenge. And one of the other pieces of outside information is what's called the force bill. Jackson passes a bill which, it's called the force bill because he's allowed to collect tariffs by force. And he makes the comment to not Henry Clay, he makes a comment about John C. Calhoun that when the Army goes in there to collect the tariffs, if South Carolina resists, he is going to hang John C. Calhoun from the first tree confined for treason. And it's supposed to have really inspired fear in John C. Calhoun that Jackson was going to come marching down there. And so eventually Webster and Clay engineer this compromise where they find a way to reduce the tariffs to levels that are acceptable to the South, but also to where Jackson doesn't feel like the Constitution is being disrespected by South Carolina. South Carolina is seriously talking about leaving the Union. And Jackson's like, that's not an option. You guys are staying. It's forever. It's like the national vacation Christmas party. No one's getting out of it. Take a look at that and see what. All right, document F. What possible main points or big ideas could it go with?
Like the post office quote.
Okay, it could go with economic. It might go. It's probably going to go with economic, but it could also go if you have a section about guardians of the Constitution and how Jackson believes that he's a guardian of the Constitution and he's protecting it. South Carolina attempting to secede from the Union, to leave the Union. That's basically splitting the Union apart. And so Jackson is saying that is not going to happen. I am responsible for enforcing the laws, and I'm going to make sure that you guys stay. No one's leaving. So what quote in there? This is from the South Carolinian point of view, the acts and resolutions of South Carolina. What's South Carolina's argument?
Well, I mean that they're kind of like being acted upon by non-slaveholding states, or like being oppressed.
That the rest of the nation does not understand the issues in South Carolina, and therefore South Carolina should have the right to nullify or render void federal laws. That they shouldn't have to listen to the Constitution. It goes back to the idea of that compact theory where Jefferson and Madison argued that states had created the federal government, therefore states should have the right to nullify or render void federal laws. That's kind of the idea that's being spoken about in this document, is that compact theory. But the difference is, it's the doctrine of nullification. John C. Calhoun wrote, the South Carolina Exposition and talked about the doctrine of nullification, where states should have the right to nullify or render void federal laws. Okay, so he's talking about non-slave-holding states earnestly request that the government of these states will promptly suppress all associations. So they're basically unhappy about, fugitive slaves. And then they're talking about the post office, distributing letters of incendiary tracts. So they don't specifically talk about the issue of tariffs, and they don't mention that whole issue, but that's kind of like the outside information that this document is supposed to jog in your mind. So the other thing you might talk about, the compact theory still applies, because they're basically saying federal government shouldn't be allowed to do these things. South Carolina should be allowed to, override it. All right, document G, if you had a social section, document G might go with social. It could also go with Guardians of the Constitution. The Cherokee Indians will win a Supreme Court case, Worcester versus Georgia, where they won the right to stay on their land according to the Supreme Court. John Marshall ruled in the Cherokee Indians' favor. The Cherokee had an alphabet. The Cherokee had a written language. They established law and order. They were known as what's called one of the 5 civilized tribes. And they're going to be forced to go on the Trail of Tears by Andrew Jackson. And Jackson's quote to John Marshall is, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Who is actually supposed to make sure the Supreme Court and its rulings are enforced?
Executive power.
Executive. The commander-in-chief is supposed to do that. And Jackson talks about being a guardian of democracy, and protecting the Constitution. Well, in this case, he's not. He's acting basically out of what he believes is his own. His personal belief is that it's going to happen sooner or later. That if he doesn't move the Native Americans, somebody else will. And that whites and Native Americans just can't get along. And that there'll always be conflict. So the only way to resolve the conflict is to transport the Indians across the Mississippi River into the West on Indian reservations. Now, for the Native Americans, they don't want to go. They want to stay. A lot of the Cherokee hide out in Tennessee, in Georgia, in North Carolina, in the hills. The Seminoles don't want to leave either. They spend the next several years fighting, the U.S. Army trying to stay in Florida. They don't want to go. And so really, Jackson's kind of like thumbing his nose at John Marshall and just saying, well, you know what? I know better than you. So these people are going to move.